Invention is one of the most talked about skill ideas that has ever come to RuneScape, but what if we redesigned it completely to fit in old school RuneScape? In this video and a series of others, we're going to talk about bringing other ideas from other games into old school to greatly improve the experience. If that sounds like something you're interested, feel free to subscribe, but let's get into it. Today we're going to be mining some gems in the background, just something simple so that I can try to explain what I'm thinking, but you can have something to watch. So what's Invention? Invention is a new skill that allows you to break down your existing items into new things to benefit your gameplay. The process goes like this. You take your resources to an Invention hotspot and engage in some experience gathering while also gathering energy. Energy can be combined with components, which are gained from disassembling rare items, to create all sorts of new things. So let's get into that a bit more. When you go to an Invention hotspot, you'll be going between a couple different stations, doing research, using machines, and ultimately sacrificing the resources that you've gained throughout the rest of your skills. So this could be anything from pure essence, raw ores, gems, logs, to maybe something more substantial like plate bodies or, some crafted products like bows. So these kind of items, depending on which spot you're at, you use different items, you get different amounts of energy, and the process can be slightly different. The idea with this is to give you a process that's somewhat similar to something like Guardians of the Rift, where it's fast-paced, you move between different stations, but at the same time, you're not just clicking a lot, there's no necessarily tick manipulation, and there's a variety of different styles for different players. If you just want energy and you don't really care about XP, you could do a low XP method that gives more energy. If you want as fast experience as possible and you don't care about the energy, then you can buy extra energy from other players and use that to do a high experience method that drains your energy. Overall, this is going to be the primary way that you gain experience over time, is generating the energy. What this does is it allows you to turn existing resources that are dropped from bosses and that are kind of flooding the game into a new resource that is completely, not found on boss tables at all, and can be used for a variety of things. So let's get into what you can use them for. You're going to want to combine your energy with components, and components can be found in a variety of rare items. As a start, all unique, non-stackable items in the collection log under the bossing, raids, and clues section will give unique components. Not all the items are going to give the same amount of components, and not all items will give the same components each time. Players will be able to check the expected outcome before disassembling, so it's not going to be a total mystery, and I'm sure there'll become an optimization thing where they're like, oh, this is the best one to disassemble, but if you're an Iron Man, then you could just disassemble whatever you have. And not all the components are going to be available right away. Here's a mock-up I made of the components as I was thinking. So you could see that it's not like every item gets its own kind of component. Instead, there's groups. So all the Slayer bosses would give Slayer's components. All the Wilderness bosses would give Wilderness components. I decided to separate out the God Wars bosses because they're kind of an iconic piece of content and they're all very different and interesting in their own ways. But you could easily group them as well into, say, a third age or fourth age component or something like that. As you can tell, there's a big difference between how much you're going to want to sacrifice a trident and how much you're going to want to sacrifice a twisted bow. But in the end, the amount of components that you're getting from each item is totally customizable by the mods, and of course the usefulness of the perks that you're going to get is totally customizable as well. In this way, that it creates at least some kind of item sync for overall from content from a various piece. So obviously you're not going to want to disassemble a twisted bow, but if you were to disassemble a prayer scroll or something, then you would get Zerikian components. And that can be the primary way that people get those components. Again, not all of them would be available right away. You would have to unlock them through a variety of processes, including quests, maybe diaries, maybe even a monster drop that gives you a blueprint to show you how to use these new components. And that means that like whenever you introduce new items, you don't have to introduce the components with them right away. You could just say, I don't know how to disassemble this yet, or I don't know what I'd get from this, better not disassemble it, or something like that, until you're ready to introduce new effects, and then you release the method by which to unlock those components. Fortunate components I added as, they've been very successful in the other iteration of this skill, in making clue scroll items a lot more worth it. Now, this is also totally customizable. You could add multiple fortunate components from the higher tier clue items. You could add only a chance to get a component from the lower tier clue items. The balancing is totally up to you. Just the core idea is that you would get some kind of useful component from clue scroll items, so it gives them a sync. And the only other one that I added that wasn't in these strict rules is dragon components. And that's just kind of as a bit of fun because dragon items are iconic to old school, and so I wanted to give them a sync to keep them somewhat valuable, even though some of them can be bought from a shop. So what do you use the components for? You combine components and energy to make perks, devices, and machines. Oh, I got a clue scroll. That's a fortunate component. Perks are stored in these gizmos. So basically you're creating a little container and you're trying to store a perk in it by adding components and hitting an RNG rule. So yeah, this isn't a guarantee. Say if I have one fortunate component and I put it in and I say, what do I have a chance to get? And there will be a list of perks that you could possibly get from that combination. Some will be more guaranteed, where if you're putting a ton of rare components in there that took you a lot of money to get, you're going to have a high chance to get the perk that you're looking for. Where some are going to be more, only a chance to get them, where it takes you actually a lot of attempts and maybe a lot of item syncs before you're getting what you want. Gizmos are stored on your tool belt, and so this would be a new inventory slot or a new equipment slot. And I think that it should have about 3 slots total. So you could store 3 perks at once or 3 perk gizmos at once. And this would be basically your loadout. You could change these at any time. You're not locked into having the same perks. You just take them out, put them back in your bank or in a storage bag or in like a storage vault or anything like that. Excuse me. So basically you can just keep upgrading your own perks as if there were any of your other gear. Now, what's these perks going to have? Well, they'll just offer some kind of passive effects, and they can benefit combat, they can benefit skilling, or whatever you want. We already have a bunch of passive effects in game in other item sets, so you could recycle those to add them on to existing sets, or you could just come up with new stuff entirely. Some examples might be, currently we have lifesteal, we have damage absorption, we have prayer drain reduction, we have poison immunity in a bunch of existing items. But you might also have something interesting like a chance to re-roll any zeros. You might have a perk where if you have a successful hit, you'll always hit at least a 3. You might have a perk where you use half the runes that you were going to use before, something like that, which already existed with the Kodai, like they have a 15% rune reduction. These are just some examples. Obviously, the perks can be totally balanced however you want and mixed up depending on how expensive the components you get are, how rare it is to get that perk, and of course how useful it's going to be overall. So it's 3 new slots, but really it's just 1 new slot and you change your loadout each time. I feel like this definitely could work in old school. We already had somewhat similar in terms of the Shattered Relics League, where you had perks active at all times and you could switch them out. Obviously, you'd have to change the interface a little bit, but the core basic idea is the same. And here you only have 3 instead of 7. So you get a lot of chance to keep it simple, and it doesn't have to be too complicated. The only thing that you would need to use these perks once you're trying to use them is energy. So these will be chargeable items, and they drain energy, and this is where the energy comes from the experience gathering comes into play. So yes, this does mean that anytime you want to do something with perks active, you're going to be draining energy, which is coming from the other players training the experience, which gives like a really big demand for this, But again, you could balance it in terms of how much drain each perk is using, and make sure that it's not like stressing the economy too much. But ultimately, because it's draining energy, it also is providing the incentive to drain those resources from the rest of the game. So that's perks. The second thing you can make is devices. So devices are unique, untradeable items that use a larger amount of components. These items can be tools that aid in special skilling methods, provide unique benefits to combat, or anything else, just like perks. Totally unique and totally, different. But the difference is these are just items that, either you can wield or they sit in your inventory or whatever. Because they're untradeable, players would need to be able to unlock the ability to make these things. Maybe that's through quests, again, maybe through a task system, maybe like a contract system, or mini games, or whatever else. Some examples of this could be maybe an upgrade to the Bone Crusher, where it crushes bones, but maybe it also collects them if you don't want to crush them. It could be a device that automatically reanimates any ensouled head drop. I think that would be nice. Or maybe even something like the Ring of Well Skulls Accumulator, but it just sits in your inventory. Again, these are all very basic examples of like what devices you can make that would be interesting, and I'm sure that there could be some like way cooler stuff down the line that uses, a more significant amount of components. The third thing that you would make is machines, and machines are just like devices, but they're large scale, and instead of having them as items, they become permanent installations in various places around the world. These could improve existing processes or offer new ones entirely. Again, you would have to obtain blueprints, you would have to unlock them, and you'd have to use energy and components to create them. An example of this could be a high-speed furnace that allows you to create cannonballs 100 times faster, but at a greatly reduced smithing speed and smithing XP. It would take more input than a standard furnace, but it would become a machine that like you could use permanently, maybe stored in a smithing guild or below Ice Mountain, like the Incando area or something like that. And this would give users a specific target to hit for their invention level, where they're like, I really want to reach this level so I can unlock the cannonball machine, and then I can train my smithing there. I think that would be really interesting. But again, that's just one example of machines that could be useful. And I think machines would also be useful in terms of having ways to upgrade your invention hotspots. So going back to when we were producing energy before, you want a way to improve that process by, as you level up. So you want to upgrade your machines, you want to upgrade your energy producing capacity. So that's the main skill. You gain energy and you make perks, machines, and devices. So why is this good? The aim of this skill is to provide an item sink that is future-proof. At any time, you can change up what kind of machines and devices that components are able to make and improve it with just releasing something new. Just being like, oh, well, now we're introducing a new machine called this that you can make with these existing components. So it makes item sinks that are future-proof. This is good because it means that the mods don't have to continually introduce brand new item sinks every time. Sorry, so just realized we were still in there. So this means that like there's a permanent way to have item sinks in the game, and as I said, the mods don't have to totally make a new one for all the time. And it also means that like as you want newer items to start being sunk out of the game, you can introduce those components via quests or whatever. Perks are simple to understand. There's only 3 of them. You can have a very simple variety, and they can be passive effects that already exist in game or are simple to see. And they give an additional reward space for new content without overwriting existing item niches. So basically, like all the weapons that you have, you're still going to want to use, but when you have new content, it's giving you new rewards that don't just say, well, this sword is better than that sword. It's like, this sword I'm still using, but now I'm using it with a perk. as we've seen, like, there's only so far you can go in terms of niches and still make it useful. So this gives some more niches that could liven up the game without, again, overwriting the existing ones. They can be rolled out at custom speeds, as I said, due to using the quests and unlocks. And that means that, like, the release, you wouldn't have to go too crazy. You could see what people think. And then, again, as polls come out, you say, would you like some new perks yet or not? Machines improve skilling in dramatic ways that make sense in the world. So instead of Jagex just saying, oh, suddenly you find these robes that you can make 60% more runes with. That's cool, but at the same time, it's just kind of cheap because you say, well, why couldn't we have had these robes before? And it's such a dramatic increase. But instead, you as the player have found a way to increase your skills and to increase your output by leveling up a new skill that you never had before. You're inventing a new way to play just by leveling up your skills, which I think is very cool. And just to, compare this, like, this is an RS3 skill. It has been around for a while, but the changes that I've suggested here are pretty significant. It's like a totally new skill for old school, and I'd like to highlight those changes just to show why I think this will work really well for old school. Instead of parts and uncommon components coming from all kinds of items, like you can disassemble anything, you just get rid of that, and it eliminates a lot of confusion when only the rare items, a unique item, something that you're getting that you're like, oh, this is, a collection log pop-up. It's in the log. I can tell it's there. That's going to give me a component. The other stuff is just sunk out of the game and turned into energy. Obviously, there's no divination in this game, so the energy that's needed to power the invention devices doesn't come from there, but instead it just comes from syncing out the already existing resources in the game. This is better than disassembling those resources into parts that you don't really need, because it just eliminates an extra step, and it's a lot more easy to understand. Instead of augmenting all of your gear and leveling it up, we're just going to have the 3 slots. So instead, in RS3, if you didn't know, like, you had to level up your gear, and this would mean that, like, each individual piece of gear had another version that was an augmented version. It was untradeable, and then you had to level it up, and as you level it up, your perks got a little better, and it made such a long process to actually getting your perks working well. And it also affected disassembling, and it meant that, like, if you're trying to get components, you had to, like, spend time leveling up your items, and it just, like, it made things way too complicated, in my opinion. I think this version works a lot better, where you just disassemble the items you want to disassemble, and then you turn it into perks, and you just use those perks. Perk slots simplified. The way that it works in RS3, as I said, is by storing them on your items and weapons and armor, and that you had, 6 gizmo slots, whereas this is only 3. And that led to a lot of power creep because each individual effect can be small, but if you have 6 of them running at all times, then that means, you're ending up with a lot of passive effects. So I'm cutting that down in half, and that seems like a good enough nerf so that it won't be too much power creep. And then we added the active training method. So while with the item leveling and disassembling, that's where the majority of XP comes from in the R3 version. But it ended up just being a 0-time skill that you don't actually end up training, which I thought was pretty stupid, because ultimately, if you're making a new skill, it should be because people want to train that skill. The rewards, they're nice, but if you don't enjoy the skill being in the game in terms of skilling, then what's the point of it being a skill versus just rewards that come from some system? So in this version, I sought to have an active training method where you get most of your XP that also provides benefits for the rewards later down the line. Overall, I think that this skill, this version of Invention, could be really good for the game. It can add all sorts of unique passive effects, buffs for skilling and combat in a way that, still keeps existing items around. And I think that's one of the most old school things that we could ever do. Instead of just getting rid of all of our old items, instead of just replacing it with new items that aren't as nostalgic, we still use them. We just use them in a smarter way by inventing new ways to use them. If this seems like your kind of thing, let me know what you think. Obviously, this isn't really going anywhere. I'm not a JMod, and JMods don't listen to my videos. So really, this is just for your thoughts and entertainment. Would this be something that you'd want to see in the game? If so, which parts do you like? Which parts do you not like? What would you change in terms of the components, the training method, the item sync, how it works, the ways that it uses resources, the ways that it uses rare items? What kind of perks would you want from this? What kind of devices or machines do you think would be fun to use? And ultimately, if this was polled in its current state, would you vote yes or no? That's about it for this. Other ideas I had are, extra skill ideas. I definitely want to tackle archaeology, although it's somewhat similar to Invention in terms of passive effect buffs. But I think it's a really cool skill idea that I might do next. But I have other ideas that aren't from RS3 in general, just ideas that I think would make old school a much better place and a more interesting place. So if that sounds like something that you'd like to hear, again, drop a subscribe, drop a like, and leave a comment telling me what you think. But until next time, peace.